Okay, hi everyone. Today is gonna be a relatively short video, I hope. It's going to be an unscripted video, so I'm just gonna ramble here in the simulacrum a little bit. But I found a quite interesting bug with Secondary Fortifier that I wanted to explore a little bit further. There's also a lot of information that you may already know in this video, but it's a complete overview of everything that's broken about Secondary Fortifier, so I will get into every little aspect of it. So hopefully this will be helpful to you, and without further ado, let's get into it. So first, Secondary Fortifier, if you don't know what this Arcane is, here it is. You gain 1 Overguard for every 100 damage dealt to an enemy's Overguard, deals ×3 extra damage to Overguard if it's unranked, and then once you rank it all the way up to level 5, you actually deal ×8 extra damage to Overguard. Now this ×8 extra damage also includes extra status damage, for instance. So if you are damaging an enemy with Overguard with Secondary Fortifier with, for instance, heat damage, those heat status procs that you will get afterwards are also 8 times more effective. To show this, I will just quickly spawn in some enemies, check if I have heat on my epitaph. So I do. Okay, now we damage them with a couple of heat procs. Here we see 77s, 135, 135. If we do it on this one, for instance, now do keep in mind that it's also based on the viral procs that I'm getting, but you can see that it's already 1200, 1500, it's a lot higher. This one in the back, 60. Wait until the stacks go away a little bit. So 60, this is 291. You can see heat procs are higher if you have Secondary Fortifier. This is all very nice. Sadly, this doesn't apply on the electricity procs that you can get from magnetic damage, for instance, because that's calculated based on the magnetic and not on your Secondary Fortifier damage. So yeah, that's pretty much what Secondary Fortifier does. As you will now also see, I have Overguard in the top right of my screen, and it's also slowly generating upwards because all of these heat damage procs also trigger Secondary Fortifier. So if you have something that deals damage over time, you are able to generate Overguard passively, as you can see right there. Now, this is quite nice because you can use it in combination with things like Protea Prime, where you have your second ability that deals a bunch of heat damage to enemies around you. So what you do is you can use Heat Inherit. So basically, the first heat proc that you apply will basically say to the game, hey, I'm applying Secondary Fortifier. Once you then proc a new heat proc, this effect will carry over. So you will also, all of your new heat procs will also deal Secondary Fortifier-like damage. Which means that if I now do my 2, you can see that I'm generating more and more Overguard as these heat procs deal more and more damage to these enemies. So that's basically how that works. So that's Protea. As I said, if you have something that deals damage over time, you can use it as a means of survival. It's actually recommended to have a very low level Arcane at that point. The Azima you can get by logging in for 100 days consecutively, or cumulatively, I should say. So logging in a total of 100 days grants you the Azima. This has a unique trait where you fire a disc that starts shooting bullets out of itself, which is nice because it means that we can just basically fire and forget about it. Rank 0 unranked, I only gain 1 Overguard. That's all we need, because once we gain Overguard, we get a small period of invulnerability, just like with a shield gate. So I throw this down, and as you can see, I modded for gas damage on this. Basically, they can't do anything to me. All of these bombards do nothing because I keep generating small bits of Overguard, practically making me immortal. This is actually quite a good tactic to use on level cap Void Cascades. Azimas can be used on caster frames like Sevagoth to make sure that you don't die. And then you can do your funny combo and then kill everybody like that. So that's Secondary Fortifier on the Azima. Then, of course, we can put it on frames like Mesa Prime on her Peacemakers, on her Regulators, and Titania on her Dex Pixias when you are in Razor Wing. So if we quickly grab a Mesa and put on Fortifier, if I now spawn in some enemies, you will see that with those Regulators, I am able to generate Overguard just like that, which is quite nice. It also means that the Regulators deal 8 times damage against enemies with Overguard. So you can use this however you want. Big heat procs, like I illustrated before. It can be quite nice. Let me just get rid of this Overguard. There we go. Thank you, guys. So yeah, don't forget that you can put these Arcanes on your Exalted secondaries now as well. This also includes Dante's Noctua. You don't need to have Noctua in your Dante to use Secondary Fortifier. What you can actually do is if you cast the 4th ability and you summon your book with the ability Word Warden, you can gain Overguard that way. Now on Dante, that's not actually that helpful because we can of course gain a lot of Overguard by just spamming R2 and then casting 4. But still, if we now fire at these enemies, you can see that when the book shoots, you also get some extra Overguards generated. So this can be nice to top up. Sadly, this doesn't carry over to books that are spawned on allies. All of your allies in the squad will also get your little Word Warden book, but they won't inherit the Secondary Fortifier effect, as far as I'm aware. So that's it on Dante. Very nice to have a Secondary Fortifier companion, basically. Then, the next thing I wanted to discuss is amps. So if you have an amp that shoots a projectile that stays around, which includes the pod scaffold as well as the 177, the propa scaffold. So the pod scaffold I have on my frame right now on my operator. The propa is the one where you shoot a big grenade in the middle that then explodes after a small duration. But the one I have right now is the one where you shoot this glaive around and then this glaive bounces to enemies. Because this glaive sticks around, what you can do is you can go into operator, then you can shoot this glaive and then gain Overguard that way on your frame once you swap back. And you will most likely have noticed this happening when you are playing due to your Last Grasp ability triggering from Unaru. Where you are on the ground, you can revive yourself if you get some kills in operator mode. You will usually see when you get revived back, if you are using something like the Propa scaffold or the Pod scaffold, out of nowhere, if you are also using Secondary Fortifier, of course, have a bunch of Overguard. So to illustrate, just shoot this, go back to the frame, and then if it actually bounces around a little bit, as you can see, I'm now generating Overguard from the amp that fired. And this works the same on the Propa scaffold as well. So this can be quite nice in a pinch if you are using Secondary Fortifier and want to quickly generate some Overguard, but you are not using it in the same way as I do with the Azima, for instance. It's a nice way to gain some quick Overguard. Then, next up, we have Nezha. You might now be saying, why Nezha? This is where Secondary Fortifier begins to become quite buggy, because some abilities in Warframe are counted as universal weapon damage. So this is things like Blazing Chakram, but also Shuriken from Ash. You have Fireball from Ember. Then you have things like Breach Surge from Wisp is also one. There's a bunch of these abilities, and not all of them work with Secondary Fortifier, but I found Blazing Chakram to work. And I think it's due to the fact that once you cast Blazing Chakram on enemies that are speared by Divine Spears, your Blazing Chakram will duplicate and will basically spawn a copy. And this new copied Chakram, for some reason, counts as secondary damage. And what you do is you cast your second ability, then you quickly swap to operator. Then in your operator, it counts as amp damage. And because amp damage is counted as secondary damage, swapping then back into your frame will cause you to start generating Overguard. So this will be a little bit hard to show, and I'm not sure if it will work because it's quite sporadic and also very buggy, which is why this is something that may get fixed in the future. But who knows, you could still find a use for it maybe. Let me find a composition where I just have 10 with Overguard and then 10 without Overguard. Now I can spear some of them, and some of them won't be speared because of them having Overguard and not being affected by the ability. And what you will see is I spear them. Then I throw my Chakram, I go into operator and I go back. And if you now look at my Overguard value, you can see that it increases because I was applying heat procs on those enemies that are hit by my Chakram who have Overguard. So to show you again, it's a bit confusing, I know. There you go. So you can see that I'm generating little bits of Overguard from that Chakram throw. But as you could also see, it's not at all consistent. Okay, so that's Nezha. Then it starts going crazier with Sevagoth, because his Sow ability that deals true damage for some reason also counts as universal damage, which then if you swap into operator counts as amp damage, which then counts as secondary damage once you swap back to your frame. So you basically start changing around the way damage is perceived by the game for it to trigger Secondary Fortifier in that way. So if I go to Sevagoth, I have Secondary Fortifier on, I will cast my Sow ability. Then, as you see, they start taking damage, but I'm not generating Overguard. Then I go into my operator, I go back, and now I will start generating little bits of Overguard. Now, as I've shown before with the Azima generating only small bits of Overguard, this is actually enough to keep you alive at level cap. All you really need is like one Overguard to be generated every second, and you're fine. You're invincible, practically, right? So this is an incredibly powerful combination that I featured like a year ago when I released my Sevagoth video, when Sevagoth Prime released. And it's not been patched since. So it's probably quite a bit of enspaghettifigation going on in the game's code that causes this. So I hope this is helpful to you as well. And then the sole reason that led me to make this video is this nice Incarnon weapon called the Thalys. The Thalys is able to make these weird shards on enemies, and these shards can explode and form out and shoot out of them. And these shards actually count as universal weapon damage as well for some reason. And as you will now probably have guessed, this means that these shards will also trigger Secondary Fortifier. So once I build up my Incarnon, which will take a little while. Now, if you look at my Overguard value, you can see I'm in Incarnon mode on the Thalys. You will see I start generating Overguard. Purely because the shards that you create are counted as universal weapon damage. And this also works via melee influence. So using the Thalys with Secondary Fortifier basically makes you invulnerable, which is quite funny. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover on Secondary Fortifier. As you can see, it's an incredibly buggy and very busted arcane if you know how to use it correctly. I hope I gave you some ideas. If I missed any weird interactions, then please let me know. I'm quite sure there will be many more. I have also seen Breach Surge trigger Overguard generation on very rare occasions, very similar to how Nezha is able to do it. And this is mainly rare because Breach Surge can't actually target enemies with Overguard, so it would need to be something like a sporadic particle where an overguarded enemy walks into it and gets hit by the hitbox of it or whatever, right? So yeah, please do with this information what you will and what you want, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye. As always, a huge thanks to all of the channel members. You know who you are. Thank you for supporting me. We have Nike 418, Tommel, Mega Ninja, Dwang Nguyen Thai, Stud6 Ben 1Y, Pinter Aaron, Furkan Chabechi, Fixin Sage, Axel Larsen, Fury Render, Blob, Ismael Pereira, Benjamin Cooper, and No Synth Linux Gaming. Thank you.